Now, content is increasingly playing a bigger and bigger role in what a marketer can do to help reach their audience. Let's start with the most important thing. What is content? How do you start to define content?
It's funny, I moderated something at Social Media Week, and I said that it's important to start with that question, because every time we get together in a forum like this, the definition sort of changes a little bit. For us, we're thinking about content a little bit differently than we have been in the past, much like everyone is. There's basically two ways of looking at it, in our opinion. Number one, you can put content at the same level as advertising. So, there's advertising and there's content. Another way you can look at it is if you take content, or take advertising rather, and you tuck it underneath content. So the idea there is that content is sort of an umbrella that sits over everything, content and creative. So advertising is one type of content. We've seen that a lot with great Super Bowl ads can be content. We've seen, famously the whole Anchorman 2 promotion with Dodge and Will Ferrell.
Sure.
Was that advertising? Is that content? If you tuck it underneath the idea of content and creative, then advertising becomes content as well. And then, of course, you have all this other content that we've always in our industry defined as content, always going back 6-7 years. So everything from tweets and posts to original video content that runs on an MCN or and et cetera.
Is there a distinct advantage to tucking advertising under the banner of content?
The advantage is most likely that there are so many new technologies that allow us to turn what has been to date creative in advertising into something more meaningful than that. And advertising's always been meaningful, of course, but how do we make it even more meaningful? And so there are technologies that help us do creative optimization, really surgical targeting, and all of that. And then certainly there's native advertising, which is that content, is that advertising. And if you do it right, it's content. If you do it really poorly, it might just be advertising that's sort of in your way, in your feed. And so there's a whole movement in our industry to try to make advertising of more value and substance in terms of its context and in how we're seeing it now. So I think that the benefit of looking at advertising as content is that it forces you to put a different filter on what you're putting out in the marketplace.
Is there any disadvantage to doing that?
A disadvantage? Well, certainly you have an entire industry that's used to, a normal parlance and normal nomenclature, and walking into maybe some of the more traditional CMOs in our industry, it might be difficult to start calling a 30-second spot that he or she puts in the Oscars as content. They might want to look at it just as advertising, because advertising has driven certain metrics for themselves all throughout time. So I think there's a certain test and learn that has to happen. There's a certain skepticism probably in certain corner offices, but that's probably the way I would look at it.
Now that skepticism, that looking at it and maybe not being comfortable with looking at advertising as a subset of content, is that a good thing that they're not comfortable and that they need to break through that comfort level, or is it a reaction that is one that maybe they're right and it really should be considered separately?
Well, we have a chief data officer at Mindshare, a guy named Bob Ivins, and he likes to talk a lot about the analogy of Moneyball, the movie Moneyball, and the idea that there were certain general managers in baseball years ago, about 10 years ago or so, who looked at the game very differently. And so instead of looking at home runs or batting average, they looked at other metrics, and they said those are the metrics that we need to employ. And if you remember the movie, there was a certain amount of ostracism that happened with this way of looking at the business, and it wound up being somewhat successful. Now, Bob talks about it in terms of data, but we can look at it in terms of almost anything in our industry. And our industry is changing in such a way where the technology and the data and the different ways of looking at the business and success metrics around paid, owned, and earned ecosystem coming together, it's all very important for us to look at it a little bit differently. So I think it's a great thing for a new crop of CMOs to look at things in a Moneyball, Billy Bean type environment. Are there downfalls to that? Usually the marketers that go into a business first are the ones that, yes, they get the benefits, but they also have to pave the way, and there's a certain comfort in maybe just staying back of the pack and drafting off of them. But you normally don't win that way.
So my follow-up here is going to be about
By the way, how many more sports analogies can I really throw into?
We'll get 2 more, at least 1 World Cup one for me.
Okay.
My follow-up here is around agencies and can they handle the Moneyball thinking? And this is why. Agencies and brands have been most comfortable with taking the large pot of money and spending it very comfortably in one spot. If you use the Moneyball analogy, you've got a lot of people who are hitting singles and doubles, getting on base, not making outs. And that would be being much more targeted in your use of media dollars and making smaller investments over longer periods of time and less campaign and more always on. Are agencies set up to guide brands to do that?
Well, I'm really happy that you asked me that question, even though we did not set this up in advance.
We did it.
Which is that no, agencies are not set up for it, but Mindshare is.
Ooh,
that's nice.
Tell
right?
me. Let's make this newsworthy.
So what we're doing here is, first of all, we look at our clients' business and we say that marketing is war. This whole idea that marketers are in this battle of attrition in their categories where they have an increasing competitive set. There's audience fragmentation going on. And there's money that's being decentralized, and what they have to do is to win market share, and their competitors are nipping at their heels every day, and it's this very crazy, even more so, competitive landscape. So what we've done to try to address that through our agency positioning of adaptive marketing is to build out rooms, physical spaces that we call the loop. And what the loop is, as I said, is physical spaces, but it's also a process around how we go to market.
Okay.
There are screens that are set up in a room. Our teams come in on individual client business. So we bring in the search person, the social person, the broadcast person, the client lead, the insights guy. Everybody comes into the room together, an hour a day. And they analyze what's coming off of those screens. So they know what's going on with their brand. They know what's going on with their competitive set. And inherent in all of that is they know what's going on with the audiences that they're all trying to reach.
Are they bringing in all this data and then providing the analysis on top of it?
Yeah, so we look at the data, and in the space of the hour, we're correlating any insights that we find with actions, so recommendations we want to bring to the client. And as soon as the meeting is over, the recommendations go to the client for their go, no-go decisions. And if the cadence with one of our clients is on a daily basis, then every day we're starting something new, which is why we call it the loop, because we're looping back around every day.
Hopefully an iterative loop, right?
No, absolutely, because we're always getting smarter about what's going on in the marketplace. And what we say is, at the end of the day, if you think about servicing clients, an airline, when you tweet at an airline now, with about 15 minutes you're getting a tweet back at you. But marketing typically doesn't work that way. We plan on a campaign by campaign basis, which might be annual or quarterly or somewhere in between. But we can't afford to do that anymore. We have to diminish the distance between how we service current customers and how we market to current customers and to prospects. So the loop enables us to do that. So using data and putting data at the center of everything we do helps us get there. And part of what we do is media optimization, but it's also content creation or creative optimization. Even though we're not a creative agency per se, we're a media agency, we have the data that comes out of a media buy that can go back in to inform where creative runs, how we target.
Okay. Now, will there be a special secret sauce that Mindshare is using on how to take all this data and turn it into meaningful data, right? Actionable data.
So the secret sauce, which should not be so secret, is our partners. We got to partner very, very well. And there are a lot of companies that exist in this marketplace right now. We have a number of insight partners, and those are companies like our own media partners, but other data-driven companies that throw off the insights that we see on the screens. But importantly, it's the action partners that we have on the outbound, where we take that insight and turn it into action so we can move with speed to market. And then, of course, the other part of the equation, the other part of the recipe and the sauce, are our people, because our people are the ones who are indoctrinated into this way of working. So they're identifying action partners, they're identifying the insights and what to do about it in ways that move with such speed that we believe we've got a competitive advantage of our own.
That's fantastic. Knowing all that and getting down into the real tactical part of the conversation, when you are creating content for a brand, creating branded, let's say they're originating the content, it is meaningful to their audience. most brands suffer from the inability to get a real big audience very quickly on their own organically. So what do you guys do here at Mindshare, and what do you, what's the process you go through to ensure that they're getting that reach that they really need for this content?
Well, it's a great question, and we're sort of at the, let's go with a sports analogy again. We're sort of in the second inning of a 9-inning game.
Okay.
And if you saw the Mets game last night, you'll know that they blew it an extra inning, so we can't even be longer. The way we're looking at this is a number of things. Number one, you have to be able to provide some analysis to yourself about where you believe the content is going on its own, potentially without the help of paid. We have done a few engagements recently where we spent very little money, sub 6 figures, and got well into 7 figures of views on our content, and that's fantastic when that can happen. There are certain other instances when you know that that's not going to be the case because of what you're looking at, the tea leaves that you're reading. And in those cases, you need a lot more paid media in order to stoke those fires. The difference, obviously, in a lot of cases is what the content is supposed to do, what its intention is.
Okay.
If the intention is to drive sales and it feels a little bit more like marketing specifically, you're going to have a harder time without paid.
Getting the viewership to that content.
Getting
right?
the viewership.
Yeah.
You can take Obama and Galifianakis in Between Two Ferns, and you can say, well, that was a marketing message beyond. Like that's, then that's what's been being talked about in certain cynical corners of the media right now. But it was a piece of content, and it played into the fact that it's part of a series that's been ongoing with a built-in audience. There is not a lot of paid, if any paid, that is necessary in something like that. And,
right.
and I'm sure that there was very little, except for maybe promotional elements that Funny or Die put behind it.
Got a lot of PR, obviously, as well.
Got tons of PR. Certainly, they had pretty good talent draw. But if you don't have that, then you're going to need more paid to stoke those fires.